Institut Seni Indonesia Surakarta atau ISI Surakarta adalah perguruan tinggi seni negeri di bawah Kementerian Riset, Teknologi, dan Pendidikan Tinggi Republik Indonesia. ISI Surakarta telah menempuh perjalanan panjang dalam mengarungi dunia pelestarian dan pengembangan seni.
ISI Surakarta memiliki visi menjadi perguruan tinggi seni berbasis kearifan budaya Nusantara yang berkelas dunia dalam sistem tata kelola yang akuntabel dan transparan. Adapun misi ISI Surakarta adalah melaksanakan pendidikan, penelitian, dan pengabdian kepada masyarakat dalam rangka pelestarian dan pengembangan seni dan ilmu seni berbasis budaya Nusantara yang unggul dan bermanfaat bagi masyarakat.
Di bidang akademik, ISI Surakarta didukung oleh dosen-dosen yang berkualitas, antara lain 189 dosen yang telah berpendidikan S2 dan 36 dosen telah berpendidikan S3, serta 10 profesor dan juga didukung oleh para empu dan tenaga profesional baik sebagai seniman, desainer, komposer, koreografer, maupun performer di tingkat nasional dan internasional. Penyelenggaraan proses belajar mengajar didukung laboratorium komputer, laboratorium fotografi, studio editing multimedia, studio kriya kayu, studio kriya kulit dan logam, studio desain interior, studio lukis, studio pedalangan, studio karawitan, dan studio teater. Terdapat 3 lahan kampus luas 25 hektar meliputi kampus Kentingan, kampus Kepatihan, dan kampus Mojosongo. Fasilitas yang dimiliki antara lain 31 gedung dengan 103 ruang kuliah praktik dan teori, gedung galeri seni dan multimedia, teater besar berkapasitas 500 penonton, teater kecil berkapasitas 250 penonton, perpustakaan, dan pendopo. ISI Surakarta mempunyai 2 fakultas, yaitu Fakultas Seni Pertunjukan yang berada di Kampus 1 Kentingan dan Fakultas Seni Rupa dan Desain yang berada di Kampus 2 Mojosongo, serta program Pasca Sarjana. Fakultas Seni Pertunjukan mempunyai 5 program studi, antara lain program studi seni karawitan, program studi seni pedalangan, program studi seni tari, program studi etnomusikologi, dan program studi seni teater. Program studi S1 Seni Karawitan bertujuan menghasilkan sarjana seni karawitan yang memiliki kemampuan pengerawit, komposer, atau peneliti seni karawitan. Program studi S1 Seni Pedalangan bertujuan menghasilkan sarjana seni pedalangan yang memiliki kompetensi sebagai dalang, serta sebagai peneliti bidang seni pedalangan. Program studi S1 Seni Tari bertujuan menghasilkan sarjana seni tari yang memiliki kompetensi sebagai penari, koreografer, peneliti, serta bidang lain seperti guru tari, pentas tari, desainer pakaian tari, manajer pertunjukan, dan kritikus tari. Program studi S1 Etnomusikologi bertujuan menghasilkan sarjana etnomusikologi yang menguasai bidang pokok sebagai peneliti, serta memiliki kemampuan lain sebagai jurnalis dan menghasilkan karya-karya penelitian etnomusikologis, musik, etnik Nusantara. Program studi S1 Seni Teater menghasilkan sarjana teater yang memiliki kompetensi sebagai aktor, penulis naskah, serta peneliti bidang seni teater. Fakultas Seni Rupa dan Desain mempunyai 8 program studi, antara lain program studi Kriya Seni, program studi Desain Interior, program studi Seni Rupa Murni, program studi Televisi dan Film, program studi Desain Komunikasi Visual, program studi Fotografi, program studi Batik, serta program studi Keris dan Senjata Tradisional. Program studi S1 Kriya Seni bertujuan menghasilkan sarjana yang memiliki kompetensi di bidang seni kriya, baik kriya kayu, logam, dan kulit, juga sebagai peneliti seni kriya. Program studi S1 Desain Interior bertujuan menghasilkan lulusan yang memiliki kompetensi di bidang desain interior, meliputi desain interior transportasi, desain interior turisme, desain pertunjukan, desain furniture, peneliti, dan konsultan interior. Program studi S1 Seni Rupa Murni bertujuan menghasilkan lulusan yang memiliki kemampuan di bidang keseni-rupaan, meliputi pelukis, pematung, dan desain grafis. Program studi S1 Televisi dan Film bertujuan menghasilkan lulusan yang memiliki kemampuan di bidang pertelevisian dan film dengan kompetensi sebagai kameramen, director of photography, editor, program director, serta penulis naskah. Program studi S1 Desain Komunikasi Visual bertujuan menghasilkan lulusan yang memiliki kompetensi sebagai desainer iklan dan pengkaji iklan. Program studi S1 Fotografi bertujuan mencetak sarjana fotografi dengan kemampuan dalam penciptaan dan pengkajian di bidang seni fotografi yang meliputi fotografi seni, fotografi komersial, dan fotografi jurnalistik. Program studi D4 Batik bertujuan menghasilkan sarjana batik dengan kompetensi kemampuan sebagai desainer batik dan peneliti batik. Program studi D4 Keris dan Senjata Tradisional menghasilkan lulusan dengan kompetensi sebagai desainer keris dan peneliti bidang keris dan senjata tradisional. Program Pasca Sarjana mempunyai 2 program studi, yaitu program Magister S2 Penciptaan dan Pengkajian Seni dan program Dr. S3 Penciptaan dan Pengkajian Seni. Program Pasca Sarjana Magister bertujuan menghasilkan magister seni yang memiliki kemampuan mengembangkan ilmu seni dan penciptaan seni, mampu memecahkan persoalan ilmu dan penciptaan seni dengan pendekatan inter atau multidisipliner, menghasilkan karya inovatif dan teruji, serta mendapat pengakuan nasional maupun internasional. Program Pasca Sarjana Doktor bertujuan menghasilkan doktor seni yang memiliki kemampuan mengembangkan seni baru di dalam bidang keilmuannya atau praktik profesionalnya melalui riset hingga menghasilkan karya kreatif, original, dan teruji, serta mampu mendapat pengakuan nasional maupun internasional. ISI Surakarta sebagai institusi pendidikan tinggi berkewajiban mengembangkan ilmu seni dan teknologi dalam konteks kreativitas seni. Orientasinya diarahkan untuk menghasilkan lulusan yang memiliki kompetensi unggul dalam bidangnya dan memiliki komitmen terhadap kemajuan peradaban manusia. ISI Surakarta selalu terbuka dalam menerima kritik dan saran demi kemajuan dunia pendidikan tinggi seni.
Institut Seni Indonesia Surakarta. Ini adalah kesempatan yang luar biasa dan berharga bagi saya untuk menjadi pembawa acara di hari yang bahagia ini pada hari 1 November 2021 dalam acara International Film Workshop 2021 Research in Filmmaking. Pertama-tama marilah kita panjatkan puji syukur kehadirat Tuhan Yang Maha Esa yang telah memberikan hidayah, kebahagiaan, kesehatan dan rahmat kepada kita semua sehingga dapat hadir dan berpartisipasi dalam acara ini tanpa pamrih. Di momen yang indah ini saya ingin mengucapkan selamat datang kepada Rektor dan Dekan Institut Seni Indonesia Surakarta, Dewan Film Indonesia, dosen dan staf Institut Seni Indonesia Surakarta dan seluruh peserta yang kami banggakan. Tanpa berlama-lama, langsung saja saya persilahkan kepada Bapak Titus Supono Aji, SSN MA. Terima kasih.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. Puji syukur kepada Tuhan Yang Maha Kuasa bahwa pada tahun 2021 ini program studi film dan televisi ISI Surakarta pada akhirnya bekerja sama dengan Desa Karang di Karangpandan, Kabupaten Karanganyar, melakukan kerjasama dalam pengembangan sebuah laboratorium sosial perfilman. Tempat ini merupakan tempat yang kami impi-impikan karena di tempat ini nantinya akan terjadi interaksi antara mahasiswa, kampus, kemudian para pembuat film, dan masyarakat. Sehingga di tempat ini nantinya pengembangan film tidak berhenti hanya sebagai materi yang ada di kelas dan hanya di industri saja, tetapi kita bisa melibatkan berbagai stakeholder untuk bersama-sama mengembangkan perfilman. Kegiatan kali ini yaitu Workshop International Film tahun 2021 yang menggagas tema tentang pentingnya riset dalam penciptaan karya film merupakan inisiasi awal dari kegiatan laboratorium sosial perfilman di Desa Karang ini. Kami berharap tempat ini akan menjadi tempat yang betul-betul kolaboratif, tempat belajar bersama-sama, dan saya mengucapkan terima kasih sekali sebesar-besarnya kepada para pemateri, Bapak Tak Ing Vincent dari University of Nottingham, Malaysia, dari Ibu Rosalia Namsai Eng Chuan dari Max Planck Institute, Jerman, dan Ibu Kamila Andini yang telah berpartisipasi meluangkan waktunya untuk bersama-sama bisa mendampingi para mahasiswa kami dan para peserta workshop film ini. Semoga dengan adanya workshop ini, para peserta bisa mengembangkan keilmuannya, menambah praktiknya, dan kemudian bisa menghasilkan karya-karya yang tidak hanya berkait dengan keilmuan saja, tapi juga persentuhan-persentuhannya dengan masyarakat. Akhir kata kami mengucapkan selamat berworkshop, selamat menikmati hari-hari di Desa Karang, dan semoga kita bisa mendapatkan manfaat sebesar-besarnya dari workshop ini. Terima kasih.
Baik, selamat pagi semuanya. Selamat bergabung di acara International Film Workshop di hari kelima. Dan hari ini kita akan hadir 3 presenter dari ada Ibu Rosalia Namsai Enchuan, BA, MA, PhD dari Jerman, kemudian Khairu Pradono SSN, MSN, dan yang terakhir ada Ibu Citra Dewi Utami, SSN MA dari ISI Surakarta. Nah, untuk kesempatan di sesi yang pertama, kita akan menyimak bersama paparan dari Ibu Rosalia Namsai Enchuan, BA, MA, PhD, tentang Research in Film. Sebagaimana kita tahu, saya akan menyampaikan tentang CV beliau. Saya bacakan CV dari Ibu Rosalia dari Jerman. Beliau menempuh PhD dari Max Planck Institute for Social Anthropology, kemudian menempuh magister di Modern South and Southeast Asian Studies, Institute for Asian and African Studies, Humboldt University, Berlin, Jerman, dan menempuh BA-nya di Asian Studies and Management, University of Technology, Business and Design, Konstanz, Germany. Kemudian kita hari ini akan menyimak tentang paparan beliau tentang research in filmmaking. Baik, tanpa perlu berpanjang lebar, kepada Ibu Rosalia, kami persilahkan.
Thank you so much for this opportunity and this invitation to share a little bit about my work and my thinking on the topic of research in film and in filmmaking. I'm very happy to share with you today, and I'm a bit sad that I'm sitting in front of my computer here in Berlin and that we are not able to have a real conversation. But I still think at the same time, yeah, I'm happy to, even though I'm not there, I can share a little bit, and I'm happy to also receive your comments or your questions later, maybe by email. It's important for me to say at the very beginning that I'm speaking to you today as an anthropologist. I have been doing research in Indonesia, working with film communities. And I'm also a filmmaker, and I'm also an artist. And the role of theory is something that is very important in my practice. And what I will be talking about today, or what I will be sharing today, is what has inspired me in my work. And I don't think that it's just my take on things, and I'm very well aware that others might disagree. And I think it's also very important, and this is something I always tell my students, that you need to find out for yourself what your values are and what your ethics are. There's not one perfect way. And what I want to do today is just to offer some different perspectives on documentary, on research in film. And I think it's important to remember that we are not detached from the world. And it matters very much what we are doing, and it has larger implications sometimes than we think it does. And this is whether we want it or not. So I think it's good to be aware of the larger context of the world that we are acting in, and then being able to make more informed decisions on how we want to make film and how we want to do research. And I was really happy to be invited to speak about the topic research in film, because I think it's a very important topic. And why is it important? Because it means that when you make a film and you do research for your film, it means that you need to think about the question of who speaks in the film, and who speaks about someone else, or maybe who do you create a space for to speak for themselves. And I want to start this talk with a bit of background information on critical theory that thinks about these questions, like of who speaks and with whose voice. And doing research for me also means that you situate yourself and that you are entangled. You become part of a network when you become part of a community when you're doing research. And so you develop a relationship, and it's also about nurturing that relationship and creating a climate of trust where things can be shared. Okay, I will wait. So one body of theory, I think that is very important to everything that I'm doing in anthropology, but also when I make video art or more documentary style project, is the fact, thinking about the fact and really acknowledging that colonization is not over. It's the world that we live in is still a very colonial one. And we constantly need to remember that the world as it is and modernity as such is built on violence, and that these violences, they still persist. And all these things, big narratives of civilization, globalization, modernization, they often forget the violent histories. And also, the world is often constructed within these narratives as a world where cultural difference, the difference between different cultures, is considered as something that is hierarchical, which means you have modern cultures and you have non-modern cultures. And this hierarchical difference between cultures is also framed in a temporal way, meaning that there is some kind of linear progress towards arriving at modernity over space and time. And I very much disagree with this kind of worldview that puts different cultures or different countries on this hierarchical way of making and understanding the world. But at the same time, this is a reality on how our world is made. And this logic of domination, of the West being somehow superior or the end goal, also goes into the way we think and how we make the world. And then at the same time, it also influences how we make film. And there is a concept that I would like to introduce, because I'm thinking about it a lot, and it's called epistemicide. And I presented here a short definition of it, but I also presented here it's not a poem, but it's a quote from a book that I like very much. And I think it captures very well what is meant with epistemicide. And it means that it considers that in the making of our modern world during modernization, there was a lot of violence that flattened landscapes of very diverse wisdoms, what today we maybe call myth or traditional knowledge or indigenous knowledge. And it was all mainstreamed into so-called rational knowledge that you can prove and that is closer to one truth. And I'm saying this, but I'm not believing in it. And I think we should be very critical about this. And everything else in this movement towards modernization was being marginalized and also was like eliminated from official systems, from schools, but also, and this is why I bring it up here, it kind of also is tied to this idea of documentary being closest to the truth, and the access to it is only through the things we can prove by scientific method. And this is something that I personally also would like to question. And I think my father is Thai, but I grew up in Germany, and then you are studying in Indonesia. And this whole question of colonization, of the need to decolonize, and of the need to think about these things, these violences, and also see what maybe has been left, is often a discussion of the West against the other parts of the world, like the global North against the global South. But I think it's not that easy to make this distinction, and this is why I also put this quote. And it's something that is very important to consider when we make a film and we do research on the film, to realize or to think about who am I and where am I positioned in this topic or in this research. And it's not that automatically because I'm like, my father is from Thailand or you are from Indonesia, doesn't mean that you are the victim of epistemicide. It's something, the boundary doesn't run along the country you were born or the country you hold a passport in. So it's always the community you belong to is like, the question is, if you share the struggle against inequality, against domination, against gender inequality, against colonial domination. And this is very important. And often when we do research and we talk about a certain issue like poverty, it's often, this is the question that needs to be considered. And I'm bringing this up because there is this critique in recent discourse in art and filmmaking that only if you are personally affected by an issue you can make a film about it, or you should talk about it. And I think there is a point to opening space, and I will come back to this later, for people to share their own story. But even if you're not part of the community, I think that you are already part of this world, and you are already part of this problem when you know about it, or this issue that whatever we are researching when we want to make a film. So there is a sense of possibility and also a sense of power to really make a difference in the world. Because when we look at it from this historical perspective, and also looking at contemporary issues, call it our very, very still colonial world, and so many issues that are happening because communities are marginalized, the environment is being exploited. I still do believe that there is a decision to be made to where you want to position yourself in these entanglements. And one question I think a lot about, I do like to overthink things, is the issue with representation, or with the aim to represent something or someone or a community. And it's interesting to me that documentary film, or also documentary writing, journalism, is very often considered as the opposite to fiction, in some kind of a binary opposition. So people think that there are facts, there are things that are actually happening, like real events, And then on the other side, there's fictional films for entertainment. And so there's this reputation for documentary to have this indexical relationship to truth, to like one single truth. And this is something that I would question, because I don't believe there's one single truth. And there is a whole history of colonial epistemicide to even put the framework of what can be considered as truth, and whose stories or whose language or way of expressing thoughts would be considered as truth. And there's a very long history, and of course this is just like a very brief overview, and you should, if this is something that is interesting to you or relevant to your practice, you can read more. And I also put some references, but there's a very long history of telling stories about other people. And ever since in Western Europe, there was this idea of the Enlightenment, of the idea of we can find the truth if we just use the right method, we will arrive there. It has also been an instrument of power. And when we look, for example, at documentary, there's always this need for transparency. A need for transparency that sometimes you have to be transparent. I have to understand you. And I somehow, in encounters with people I was working with people I was doing research with, and I will speak about it more later, because I will talk about one research project with a community of Thai women in Berlin. I felt very uncomfortable to meet someone and render this person transparent. And the beginning also of the discipline that I'm doing my PhD research in, anthropology, is very colonial. It was about meeting the other. It was about an encounter with someone different. And then this whole fetishization and this translating and capturing and understanding. And I know there's a good intention with wanting to understand someone else, but it can still be very violent when in the moment of encounter, the other person has to fit the boxes of the person telling their story. And the whole history of these pictures, these very horrible and violent pictures, they are representative of how the non-European other has been conceptualized as somehow lacking reason, backward, and the question is that post-colonial theory, for example, Spivak brought up, is like, and also Said, is the West in his concept with or called Orientalism, is the West invented the Orient. The West made this to also fill a void of what they didn't want to be, so they projected it on the other. But it's the person who tells the story. And if we take it back to film and research, it's you as a filmmaker creating a representation of someone else and creating an image. And in history, this has often been an othering move where you want to distance yourself, to say like, I'm not like that. And then Spivak brought up this very, very important question a while ago already, that was like, can the subaltern speak? Like, why do others, in the past, it's been like the Westerner telling stories about others, like, why can it not be themselves? Why can they not speak for themselves? And this is a question that we can take from this context to contemporary times, to today, because it still happens a lot that people go and do work with communities and tell their stories and speak about them, tell stories about them, create allegedly truthful representations of them. But the question is still, and it's in many projects, not answered. Why are they not speaking for themselves? Why do we not create the spaces for them to speak for themselves. And the problem is, I think I'm also concerned with this problem, honestly, because it's a very personal thing that I experienced a lot growing up in Germany, but not looking German, and always needing to explain myself. People would always ask me like, you grew up here, but your German is so good. You speak like your German is perfect. But you're not German. Like always this constant need of like, I don't understand you. You need to explain yourself. And it's a very violent process, even if it comes with good intentions, because you have to measure yourself against a benchmark that is, and who defines the scale, like who defines what are the categories. And for a very long time, and still up until today, the category and the benchmark is always Western modernity, and everything else that is not within this idealized, this one single idealized version of modernity is judged upon, is looked down upon, and even worse, often it's reduced and it's destroyed. And if you want to understand something, you grasp it. And when you grasp it, you take it, but you take it back to yourself. And then this is a violent movement, because what you do in doing that, you silence the other side. You don't give them the opportunity to speak. And even if, I'm saying this again because it's very important to me, at least, even if it comes with very good intentions, because they are too poor or too uneducated to speak for themselves, it's still a movement that puts you in a higher position than the person you're engaging with. So I think for me, at least, when I do research for a film project, I need to remind myself that I'm creating a work and I'm telling a story. And telling stories, and either if this is like a fiction project or documentary project, doesn't much matter, but it has ethical and political implications, not only aesthetic implications. So making informed decisions, and I'm like, there's no right and wrong, like I said in the beginning of this talk, and also for every single project that I'm doing, I still often do not know what is the right thing to do, and then I need to mostly also follow my intuition, but also consider, I think the relationship for me between these theories and reading like Spivak and Said and thinking about these things, epistemicide, is kind of the framework where I try to base my decisions in, rather than just this idea of European modernity, of progress, of telling other people's story, creating a certain imagination of them, where I'm trying to ground my decision. But in the end, I'm also very much following my intuition in a very, very specific situation and relationship with this person. And what very much helps me also in thinking about if I'm the right person to even pick up a project is like, what is my personal stake in all of this? And when I did the research with the Thai woman here in Berlin, I very soon realized that even though from the outside everyone would say, oh, they are Thai, you are Thai, so you're all the same, we are really, really not the same. They came to Germany on completely different terms. Most of them, they got married to German men, and they are in very problematic, sometimes violent marriages. There's also a big class difference. I'm doing a PhD and they have to sell food on a market. So it was very difficult for me to find that point that I think justifies me even telling a story together with them. And in the end, I looked into it and I realized that the thing that people here in Germany would look at us and would not see the difference, but would project all the histories and all the discourse and the stereotypes about Thai women onto our bodies before we can even be or say anything or explain ourselves. So this is like, for me, this was the common ground and the entry point where I wanted to explore and develop a relationship with them, a research relationship to make a film and tell a story together. And yeah, just remembering that the one story that we are gonna tell, and I always like to think of research as this process where we just spread out and there's so many possible stories that we're gonna tell. And it helps me then in having to decide which is the story that I will tell with this film, to think a bit about the larger framework and the histories. And that's why I do a lot of historical research also, not only on image making and storytelling about others, but also on the specific context and the community that I'm working with. So I can see the bigger picture and then decide, really make for myself this decision into which direction do I maybe want to push the narrative with this work. And this is another concept that I want to speak about a little bit. I think I brought it up kind of already, but just giving a name to it, it's called cognitive extractivism. And this is something that doing research, I very often felt is something I need to consider and be aware about, because we always critique colonialism and the taking of objects and artifacts into museums. And there's now this whole movement of returning back artifacts from European museums to their places of origin. But I felt when I'm doing research and I'm taking people's stories, and then I make something with these stories, like a film, or I write something, I just felt that the movement is the same, even though it's not something visible. It's something that we cannot grasp or we cannot really see. But I felt like there is a tendency towards doing this, towards taking something that is not yours and doing something else with it. And then, even if I have very good intentions, I'm also acting as a colonizer, basically, because I'm taking these things. And also I need to be very, very aware of my own positionality, that I even have the luxury of time, or of being, like in your case, maybe you're like a film student, to take the time to do research, because other people, they have to work all the time and have to find food, and that is a priority. And then there's no more space to even engage in these projects. And I think it's very important to be aware of this privilege that we have, be very critical of the fact that even if we want to help, we might reproduce some very nasty, very old power structures with our own doing. And I'm not saying this to say like no one should do anything. It's just to have a more critical lens, and like something that we check back on ourselves constantly. I think during the research, these are some questions that I think are important. And then there are two concepts that I would like to introduce now, because they inspire me a lot. Because like with all these complications, with these power structures that we're so entangled in, it feels sometimes almost hard to move and to actually do something. And you feel like, oh, if I do this research, I could tap into so many spaces where this becomes problematic. So I was, of course, looking for inspiration on how to do things differently, and how to tell stories beyond taking, beyond being a colonizer. And one concept that that inspires me a lot is opacity, or the right to opacity by Clisson. There's a whole book, but basically the thing I was saying before about the movement of grasping, of wanting to understand the other, of wanting to have a very detailed picture, or like description of a certain community that you're working with, or like people you are working with, you are doing the research with. And against this need for transparency, which is also so glamorized and like put as an ideal in Western ways of knowing, Clisson puts the notion of opacity. And opacity is something that's cloudy, it's very dense, it's very muddy, and it's not super clear. And it goes against this whole idea of modernization where everything is transparent. And I think it's very, very powerful, because in the end, if you're a researcher, if you're a filmmaker, and you want to know the other community, the other person, the other situation, opacity empowers the other to also not talk to you or refuse to talk to you if they don't want to, because maybe it's not helpful for their everyday life that someone comes and takes their stories. So opacity as a powerful move, and I will show you later, and hoping then it will make more sense how I translate this idea of opacity to my film also. And the other thing that concept ideal that really inspires me and is always in the back of my head when I make work is Trinity Minha's idea of speaking nearby. And speaking nearby, it's the very basic idea is to not simply speak about someone else and not speak about them as if they're not there. And if you speak nearby, and it's very concrete, of course, speaking nearby, if you're standing next to a person and you're in the same room, but there might be multiple reasons this is not the way we want to go in doing research and telling the story. But no matter what, if the person is here or the person is not here, you act as if the person is right next to you. And they can hear what you say, and they can also have the opportunity to speak back. There is a less hierarchical, a more equal relationship between you as the storyteller, as the writer of the film, and the researcher, and the people you're working with. You try to create, and even if this is not actually everyone in the same room at the same time, you have this in the back of your head that you leave space. You don't explain everything so it makes sense to the audience, but you leave the space for opacity, and you think of your position within the community as speaking nearby, and not you being the only voice, but also leaving the space for others. And yeah, for opacity, basically. And I know there is a tendency often especially in documentary, not so much in fiction film, to come up with a solution, to explain everything, to say this is because of that and the solution is this. And I'm really inspired by thinkers who say that maybe we should not be so afraid of not having answers and not jumping to conclusions. Because in the end, if there's this crisis of not understanding the situation, it's also a crisis, it's always a glitch in the reproduction of something. So if we hold still for a while and allow for different voices and for things to not make sense, we also open the possibility for alternatives. And if we engage in this, like speak nearby, if we engage in a respectful dialogue, we leave this gap of understanding. We just leave it open for a little bit longer. Because in the end, if we do research for a film, I think honestly, the worst thing that can happen if you already know everything about a certain topic, a community, or the people you're working with, and then you just want to prove your point. You just want to tell the story that you already have. You just want to have images to support your argument that you already made. And then you're not giving the people you're working with a chance to change your mind, to change the story. And I think this demands from us in doing research to be very humble and not at all to feel superior in any way to the people you're working with. And then also, I know there's a lot of pressure often when we create a work, especially when we work with a community that we care about. And I think we shouldn't approach work thinking that we have to change people's mind, because it will not work. It happens from inside. And I know that I can't force people to think differently. And what we can do though with making a film and researching a situation so much that we have an opinion on it. It might not be the right one, but we have a standpoint and we have an opinion on it. And then the thing we can do is giving people a nudge, an offering to them to change their mind, because there is some kind of sensation or affect that we transport with the work, but it cannot be direct. Yeah, I don't know if that's making sense, but I think the way of going too factual, too didactic can sometimes be counterproductive. So to sum all of this up, and I know it's been a lot, but I just want you to know what kind of is going on in my head during the research process, and as I move from research to writing the story or editing, making the work. Yeah, the main ideality, and I'm saying ideality because I don't think I always am 100% successful of doing this, but what I always try to do as I work with communities, making films, doing research, I want to make space and I want to hold space for them. I don't want to be the person saying, this is the story, this is it. I want to make and hold space for people who maybe within our contemporary modern times do not have the chance always to act as knowledge holders, so making and holding space of speaking nearby, of thinking nearby. And this all is conceptually. It's like how I look at it conceptually doesn't mean, again, that we are all in the same room at the same time. This is on the conceptual level of how I conceive of the work, is making and holding space. Allowing and holding space means allowing space for opacity, for things not making sense, and not giving in to this very colonial idea of transparency. I want to, yeah, this is another quote that just I feel like I'm saying it again and again, but sometimes this is good to repeat it constantly. That's also what I'm doing to myself. There's a very big difference if you do research of or with, and it really does make all the difference. If you do research of something, you objectify them, you put yourself into the center, you put this hierarchical relationship. And if you practice, here it's about anthropology, but I think research and filmmaking is not very, very far from anthropology. You study with people, you find out things together that you alone do not know before you do the research, and you create a space for this engagement, and then the film that you're making is something that comes out of this encounter, and it's very different. It's changed. The research is part of it. It's something that you could never have done alone. And in this encounter, in this collaboration, it's important to just have respect for the person you're working with. To make this more concrete, or maybe a bit more tangible, I want to share some thoughts on a film I made, and like a research-based, a collaborative research-based film project. And just for you to see also a little bit how I translate these ideals, because we can, of course, we can agree saying like speaking nearby is an ideal, but it's not as easy translated into actual practice. And the place I was doing research, the community I was doing research with, is the Thai Park in Berlin. And the Thai Park in Berlin is a place that was mentioned. I'm showing you pictures here first. It's a food market basically in a park. And it looks very authentically Thai. And it's a place that has been featured in the New York Times, and it became very famous. More and more people came. Initially, it did start as a picnic place where women made their picnics, but after it was featured in all the newspaper, it became a tourist attraction. And here from the Google Air shots, it's called differently, I can't think of the name now, Google Maps, you can see that more and more people came. It became busier and busier. And then when we look a bit closer on how this place was represented in the media, it was called, like, it was always been talking about a food market. And the whole discourse, it was always something about it's exotic, but then it's also weird. They use the word weird. So you have this whole othering movement of creating this idea that these women are somehow like making weird food in a very strange way. They are like not modern. So it didn't only happen during colonization. It happens here in like 2018, and it still happens today. And so engaging with the women and speaking to them, I realized all these newspaper articles are completely missing the point. This is not a food market. When I talked to the woman, I realized that for them, this is a home. This is a space where they make a home. Because their homes in Germany, after coming to Germany from Thailand, they are very lonely. Often their husbands are unemployed. They have very tiny little apartments that don't really allow them to invite friends over. So the community and like meeting people, sharing food, this is what it is to them. And of course, for tourists, they don't care about Thai immigrants having a home. They just want food, and they want something cheap and very exotic. And now there was a time when the market became too big, and it was also not regulated. So it was often described as like too loud, too dirty. And they wanted to change the structures of the market to make it more official, to make them pay tax and all of these things. So I felt very like talking to the women, knowing things about Thailand, knowing also about the broader history of why these women even need to come to Germany and get married to men who do not treat them well. I felt very uncomfortable with how this discourse in the media, I thought it was very, very limiting. And I summed it up in this: they look, but they don't see. Like, they're looking at this food market, but they don't see the history. They don't see the violence, and they also don't see the stories of these women, because they don't care. They just want to go and buy food. And coming back to epistemicide that I mentioned in the beginning again before, it's like it's not a coincidence that people are blind, that they look and don't see. It has a history, and it has this history that for such a long time now, it was always the Western way of doing things to define what is normal, what is good, and what is wrong. And just because this happened, it was possible to frame the Thai park as something that is chaotic, as something that is not clean enough, that needs to be changed. This is only possible because we cannot accept that maybe a food market, and it's the same in Indonesia, I guess, can look a little bit different than the thing that you see in Germany. And what they also don't see is, because they don't need to see, is this whole question of why do these women need to leave Isan? Isan is a region in the northeast of Thailand, and it's the poorest region. And there is, like, of course, it's a very poor region, and there are always factors that kind of push you and pull you to leave your country, to leave your family, to go alone to a country that you don't know, because you think life is better there. And why is life better there? Because there's this idea of modernization, of development, of life in the West being better than it is in the home country of these women. So without having ever been to Germany, in many cases, they go there thinking life is better because we have epistemicide, we have the West as the benchmark, we have modernity as the ultimate goal. And because of that, also, we cannot see that this market has a system that is just different. So it is considered chaotic and dirty, which it is not. And these are the very invisible histories, what I was talking about in the beginning, epistemicide, this colonial imposition of the West somehow being something better. It's not in the past, it happens today, and it has, like, it reverberates these histories. It happens again and again. And this is also what is so exciting about doing research and talking to people, to me at least, but then also doing the historical research, because then you can ask questions towards history. And then it's also, when you know the broader context and you do some historical research of things, stories that maybe the Thai woman I was speaking to didn't even know, but then you can locate the problem in, like, bigger power structures and not in individual persons. And I think it's very important. We need to understand that these women didn't come to the park to illegally sell food because it was their choice. It's very much a consequence and also a concrete manifestation of these histories and global developments, of these power structures, and also in this case of hyper-mediated aesthetics of what a Thai woman is and what she looks like and what the promise of Thai femininity is. And there are a lot of unspoken histories in Thailand that people don't know about, that most people don't know about when they encounter women selling food in a Thai park. And tourism in Thailand, for example, also, tourism in Thailand didn't just pop out of anything. It happened after the Cold War, and it started with soldiers, and then it did this whole, like, the Thai woman as prostitute stereotype was created, and the reality for that was created during the Cold War. And then after that, there was the image of the beautiful Thai woman that you see here on travel advertisement. And you see also images that from the film that I shot in Isan, and this is the region where some of these soldiers were stationed, and where the women today selling food come from. And there's a reason that this region of Thailand is economically in such a difficult position, so that life cannot be good there for these women, so they have to go elsewhere, and in this case to Germany. Like always having this historical view made me understand the situation of the Thai women better, even though maybe they didn't tell me that these stories. So I have like different layers in the research. And I'm also adding here some images in the making of the Thai women, because this is also a story that most people don't know, but Thai women now kind of like exoticized, like on this picture here, looked very different in the past. And during colonization, when other countries all around Thailand, including Indonesia, were already colonized, Thailand was never colonized. This is the official story. But in order to not be colonized, there was this whole project of self-colonization. So when Western men met Thai women, they looked at them and they looked a little bit like that, probably like short hair, wearing gender neutral clothing, like this wrapping. It's like kind of a trouser, but it's a cloth wrapped around your body. And Western men didn't understand. They came to Thailand for trade and they didn't understand, and they did this whole othering move of saying, this is barbaric, we don't understand this, you are not modern, you're not wearing like Western clothes, you're not covering up, women have long hair, men have short hair. So Thailand made these cultural mandates. In order to not be colonized, they needed to be seen as modern and as civilized. So they made this whole mandates for women to look like this, for men look like this, and wear these and that clothes. In order to appear modern and civilized, they changed like the complete look. And then we end up a few hundred, not even like 100 years later, and we have the image of the Thai women circulating all over the world, giving this promise of prostitution, sexual promiscuity, which is not how Thai women were before. So there were a lot of layers historically of construction. But this is also the reason why German men want to marry a Thai woman, because they think she's just beautiful and not complicated, and she will help me in the household. So all these histories are part of the reasons why you can basically order Thai women. Like I saw some catalogs where people can order Thai women. I guess now it's happening on the internet. But why there is even such a big community of Thai women in Berlin? There's like many reasons to it. And this is what I meant earlier. Like, it's not their decision because they made a decision that was maybe not good or something. There's so many histories and structures that make such a life path very likely. And this is something I wanted to highlight in addition to those individual stories from the women. And it's also filling in all the gaps of what the New York Times article are missing. Like, it's not only a food market, it's a home. They are not weird people. They do not eat weird food. There's just like the people who are saying that and say this is weird, they buy into this whole West as the ideal, as the benchmark, and they commit the violence of othering. And then also, like, you have immigrants, you have people who came to Germany, and you have tourists, and there's different needs that they want. Tourists just want cheap food. Immigrants want to have home, want to have a life, want to be seen as human beings. And then crypto-colonialism is like this whole nation making, nation building, and that is also not mentioned here. They just mentioned they come from the northeast region of Isan, but don't add all these layers that would give a different kind of understanding. So this is what the research, historical and talking to the women added to this whole picture. And yeah, to conclude, and I hope this was not too messy. Yeah, when I was doing the work, and you should obviously watch it because it's really hard to describe a work when you can just watch it because it's an experience. But my intentions was like multiple things. I wanted to create a space for their story without needing their face on it because they were doing something illegal and they didn't want to share their stories basically on camera. Like, so I couldn't like just interview them because this would bring them in a very uncomfortable and violent position also, because it's like they're doing something illegal, so it becomes dangerous for them. So for me to expose their names would already not be okay. So I was writing this fictional character as a space to say, for the first thing, like the Thai woman, like she's imagined in mainstream media, doesn't exist. She never did. This is like Cold War. This is nationalist dreams. And now I have this other creature in the film that is speculative. And I'm like, what if this other Thai woman, this goddess, this antidote to the product that was created, this like before Western man told her what she had to look like, and then Thai government told her what to look like, and then she migrated to Germany, like all these different versions of her. Like, what if we just go back and then she becomes the storyteller for all these stories that are not told? And all of the research that I was doing, historical and talking to the women, I had a lot of conversations with them because it needs a lot of time and trust for them to share the stories with me. And in the end, she is the materialization of all of this. This is where I bring it together. So of course I invented her, and the stories that I wrote, some of it is like original from what the women told me, but it comes from different conversations, and I changed the narrative in a way that I made historical research more personal in talking about my great grandmother and all these things, because so this is where I did a lot of things, took a lot of creative decisions on what to do with the research. And so the way she looks like the video sculpture, and also like she looks unreal because she is unreal, like this Thai woman that has not been crushed so much by history doesn't exist. And I want to speculate a world where she does exist. So that's why she looks very artificial, because she is. And that's also a critique of the current situation. And she looks like a very strong Thai woman from before all of these things happened aesthetically. And conceptually, I understand her as this placeholder for other futures. And this is also why I felt like I need to move beyond representation, because there are tiny sparks of sunshine and of hope and of happiness in the lives of these women. But when we look at the whole situation, it's horrible and it's heartbreaking and it's not fair that they would be in this situation. So I need to open the possibility for different futures. And what the film does is telling this story in a kind of like speculative way, but it's totally not invented. It's all research based. I just put it together differently, like as I was trying to explain here. And I also wrote about this, and I will share a link to the writing. I really do overthink my research and my filmmaking. But I think it's interesting to just share and be very open about it. I don't even think that my way of doing it is right. It's just the way I did it with that film. And my intention with the film was not to document how miserable their lives are. My intention with the film, it was making my imagined audience for this, and also the actual first audience, because it was commissioned by a museum very close to the Thai Park in Berlin, was to make people, German people watching this film, who just go to the Thai Park and look at the smiles and the cheap food and think everything is amazing. We want the food, but we want it to be a bit more clean, like in Germany, to just like throw a lot of things at them to make them feel very uncomfortable about this level of ignorance and of engaging with people in such a way. Because obviously I feel also personally affected, because they don't even see, they just don't see people or human beings. They don't see that. They just see like a face, and then that's it. So that was what I was trying to do with the film, and what I did through the research. Yeah, you should watch the film, and I will share it and make sure that you are somehow able to access it. And if you have any questions about writing, you can contact me. I will also share my contact. Yeah, thank you very much for taking the time to listen to me, and thank you for organizing this and inviting me. And have a great day. Bye.
Miss Rosalia. Thank you very much for Miss Rosalia, Namse and Chuan MA PhD for giving us such informative and inspiration presentation, especially about the colonial theory and talk about Orientalism and post-colonial. In bahasa we say lian, others. Ada tadi juga disinggung tentang can the subaltern speak dari buku Gayatri Spivak. Bagaimana kita memposisikan diri sebagai peneliti pada pembuatan sebuah film, di mana positioning dan hegemoni ini sangat erat. Kita dituntut untuk menjadi peneliti yang humble dan respect researcher dan tidak superior dalam penelitian. Di mana kita juga harus dituntut menciptakan ruang, creating space, dan respect the others. Gitu. Oke, kita akan beralih ke presenter berikutnya. Let's move to the next presenter. Pembicara kedua pada International Film Workshop di hari kelima ini ada Bapak Hoiru Pradono. Sebelum kami bacakan, sebelum kita menyimak presentasi. Merupakan graduate program Indonesia pembuatan film. Baik, untuk presenter berikutnya sudah siap di tengah-tengah kita. Sebelum kita menyimak pemaparan beliau, saya akan membacakan CV, memperkenalkan beliau. Kalau tadi dari Jerman, kita beralih ke Padang Panjang, kita kembali ke Solo. Untuk presenter ketiga hari ini ada Ibu Citra Dewi Utami, SSNMA. Selamat siang, Ibu. Saya masih belum terdengar, mohon maaf Ibu.
Ya, selamat siang Bu Hana.
Ya, selamat siang. Bu Citra Dewi Utami, SSNMA. Beliau adalah dosen di Institut Seni Indonesia Surakarta. Beliau lulusan dari Institut Seni Indonesia Yogyakarta di bidang pertelevisian dan dari Universitas Gadjah Mada di bidang media dan budaya. Untuk karya-karya beliau ini dalam catatan saya sangat banyak, namun ada beberapa karya film, ada film Human Passion di Yogyakarta, beliau sebagai produser, lalu ada ILM 3P atau 3P ini Bu ya, sebagai produser juga. Ada deretan film lainnya, kemudian beliau aktif di seminar ilmiah, di penulisan artikel ilmiah, dan penelitian-penelitian yang lainnya. Nah, hari ini kita akan mendengarkan pemaparan Ibu Citra Dewi Utami tentang culture mapping as a research in filmmaking. Baik, tanpa berlama-lama lagi, saya persilahkan kepada Ibu Citra Dewi Utami. Kami persilahkan.
Ya, terima kasih Bu Hana yang sudah bersedia untuk memoderatori saya di presentasi yang terakhir, di hari yang terakhir juga, begitu. Dan juga saya tadi meminta bantuan untuk share screen, gitu. Apakah sudah bisa? Ya. Terima kasih Bu Hana. Oke, saya sapa dulu. Selamat siang teman-teman semuanya. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah siang hari ini saya masih bisa bergabung dengan teman-teman semuanya. Pada kesempatan kali ini saya akan memaparkan sebuah hasil penelitian saya dan juga 3 orang mahasiswa tugas akhir di semester genap 2020-2021 kemarin. Begitu. Untuk itu sebelumnya saya akan mengucapkan terima kasih kepada LP2 MP3M ISI Surakarta yang telah memberikan pendanaan untuk penelitian ini. Baik, sebagai awalan saya akan menjelaskan terlebih dahulu tema yang akan saya angkat di presentasi ini adalah cultural mapping as a research in filmmaking. Begitu. Untuk menjelaskan latar belakang dari penelitian ini adalah sebuah payung penelitian dari 2 penelitian mahasiswa serta 1 kekaryaan mahasiswa. Begitu. Terima kasih saya ucapkan kepada teman-teman mahasiswa yang sudah lulus, anggota peneliti saya, Herlida Yuliawati, Ridia Hoirunisa, dan Suci Nurana. Begitu. Ketiganya sudah lulus, sudah berhasil mempertahankan laporan tugas akhirnya, begitu, untuk menjadikan mereka lulus dan menyandang gelar FF. Baik. Sebelum lebih lanjut lagi, saya akan menyampaikan untuk hasil dari pengamatan saya di 5 hari International Film Workshop 2020 ini. Baik dari Masdak di hari pertama menjelaskan tentang kaitan antara film dan juga riset. Bagaimana riset dilakukan dalam sebuah produksi film. Mas sudah memaparkan tentang banyak hal yang bisa diriset ketika kita semua akan membuat sebuah film. Bagaimana riset-riset itu dihadirkan dalam sebuah produksi film. Begitu. Untuk di hari yang kedua, Kamila Andini sebagai seorang sutradara juga telah menjelaskan tentang bagaimana proses riset yang dilakukan mulai dari tahap development, praproduksi, produksi, pasca produksi hingga distribusinya. Dan di hari yang ketiga dan keempat, para peserta melakukan workshop luring di Desa Karang untuk melakukan praktek apa yang dilakukan di sana, yaitu riset langsung di masyarakat. Ini adalah materi yang saya angkat, yaitu tentang cultural mapping. Bisa dibantu Bu Hana untuk slide yang kedua. Oke. Hal yang pertama yang bisa saya sampaikan di sini adalah pertanyaan mendasar. Apa itu pemetaan budaya? Sebelum menjawab, ketika Anda semua ikut di hari yang ketiga, turun ke masyarakat, itu yang sudah Anda lakukan. Tanpa sadar, Anda sudah melakukan itu, pemetaan budaya. Apa-apa saja yang ada di Desa Karang, telah coba untuk dipetakan, kemudian digali, apa saja yang bisa dijadikan materi untuk produksi film. Begitu. Mulai dari cerita, narasi dari informan Anda, cerita dari sejarah lokasi yang Anda datangi, seperti itu. Kemudian sampai pada ketika Anda melihat sebuah set, contohnya di kelompok saya, itu datang di pengrajin blangkon, itu bisa digunakan sebagai referensi ketika Anda nanti mau membuat film fiksi dengan setting pengrajin blangkon. Itu yang paling sederhana. Atau juga kemarin dari mentor Mas Tito Imanda sudah menyampaikan juga bagaimana secara antropologi, pendekatan antropologi, Anda bisa menggali lebih lanjut lagi. Kenapa? Begitu, sampai dengan di pertanyaan kenapa. Kenapa Pak Saimo bisa menjadi seorang pengrajin blangkon di mana customer-nya bukan hanya di daerah dekat dengan Karanganyar saja, tetapi sampai dengan di luar pulau. Gitu. Itu yang sudah dilakukan. Oke. Terima kasih Bu Hana untuk slide yang ketiga. Untuk menjawab ini, saya akan memberikan penjelasan. Ini adalah penjelasan dari keynote speaker yang membahas tentang cultural mapping di simposium dan workshop tahun 1995. Ini adalah dasar yang saya gunakan untuk memulai riset. Bagaimana pemetaan budaya itu sebagai sebuah kegiatan yang melibatkan komunitas yang mengidentifikasi dan juga mendokumentasikan sumber daya budaya lokal. Apa-apa saja yang ada di laboratorium sosial, yaitu di Desa Karang di Karanganyar, itu nanti akan diidentifikasi. Begitu. Melalui penelitian ini, unsur-unsur budaya dicatat, apa-apa saja yang ada. Dari 9 hal yang sudah 9 site yang sudah dipersiapkan oleh panitia, itu bisa digali tentang apa-apa saja yang ada di sana, seperti ada yang galeri, industri kerajinan, landmark, peristiwa, dan juga industri lokal, serta yang tidak terwujud seperti sejarah, sikap, dan juga nilai. Setelah meneliti elemen-elemen yang membuat suatu komunitas unik, pemetaan budaya melibatkan inisiatif sebagai kegiatan dan juga proyek komunitas. Kemudian yang dilakukan apa? Yaitu para peserta workshop itu merekam, melestarikan melalui nantinya karya yang dibuat, dan juga menggunakan elemen-elemen tersebut untuk apa? Untuk kepentingan masyarakatnya. Bagaimana masyarakat di Desa Karang itu nantinya bisa mengembangkan diri. Bagaimana mereka bisa membangun perekonomiannya. Begitu. Ini dari secara mendasar tentang apa itu cultural mapping. Selanjutnya, Bu. Oke, baik, secara sederhana, cultural mapping atau pemetaan budaya bisa dipahami juga sebagai pemetaan sumber daya atau pemetaan lanskap budaya yang mengacu pada berbagai teknik penelitian dan juga alat yang digunakan untuk meneliti. Begitu. Apa saja itu? Beragam aset budaya yang tangible maupun intangible yang ada di satu lokasi tertentu. Begitu. Ini yang sudah dilakukan di desa Karang. Kalau dari penelitian mahasiswa bimbingan saya yang sudah selesai, itu menggali tentang beragam potensi yang ada di Karanganyar yang itu terkait dengan pengembangan sektor pariwisata dan juga sektor-sektor pariwisata yang terdampak pandemi. Jadi ada dua hal penting di sini, bukan hanya pemetaan budaya yang sudah ada, tetapi memilih mereduksi potensi-potensi itu dari hal yang kekinian, yaitu mereka-mereka yang terdampak pandemi, terdampak penyebaran virus corona di tahun 2019 hingga di tahun 2020 hingga 2021 ini. Oke, bisa dilanjut, Bu. Oke. Ini secara umum dan garis besar untuk cultural resources atau sumber daya budaya itu bisa dibagi menjadi ada 8 materi yang bisa digali di sini. Gitu. Oke, selanjutnya Bu. Ini adalah contoh-contoh yang kemarin datangi. Yang pertama adalah rumah karawitan, di mana di dalamnya ada kelompok karawitan Mesti Tunggal dan juga Padepokan Petilasan Dewi Sekartaji, di mana Padepokan Petilasan ini disakralkan oleh masyarakat sekitar dan sering didatangi untuk berziarah. Selanjutnya, Bu. Oke. Ini adalah pertanian jamur, budidaya jamur, dan juga lumpang songo. Teman-teman bisa menentukan lokasi yang akan dipetakan, kemudian Anda semua bisa memilih dan juga menggali bagian-bagian mana yang kira-kira bisa dijadikan sebagai materi untuk produksi film. Di mana materinya bukan hanya dari sisi idenya saja, tetapi lebih ke bagaimana nanti Anda bisa memetakan, oh ketika memilih di Lumpang Songo, Anda bisa menempatkan kamera di mana untuk bisa memunculkan kesan tertentu yang ingin Anda hadirkan. Gitu. Saya hanya akan mempresentasikan sampai dengan di sini. Saya ingin teman-teman semua bisa berdiskusi tentang apa saja ketika Anda datang ke satu lokasi, kemudian bisa digali untuk dijadikan sebagai Oke, terima kasih Bu Hana. Saya akan mengakhiri presentasi saya sampai dengan di sini, Bu Hana.
Baik, terima kasih Bu Citra
Ya.
untuk pemaparannya. Dan kali ini kita tiba di sesi tanya-jawab. Beberapa dari teman-teman yang hadir di forum ini kemarin sudah ada yang bergabung di workshop luring dan sudah mengamati secara langsung, melakukan riset secara langsung dengan difasilitasi oleh Panitia International Film Workshop. Silahkan jika teman-teman ingin menyampaikan pertanyaan, saya buka. Silahkan teman-teman. Bisa melalui kolom chat ataupun bisa menyalakan mikrofon dan kameranya. Ada door prize terbaik untuk penanya terbaik nih. Silakan teman-teman. Karena tadi
menambahkan Bu Hana kemarin juga terlibat di workshop luring. Bu Hana mungkin bisa bercerita tentang apa yang terjadi di sana.
Oke, sambil menunggu dari teman-teman mahasiswa ya dan para hadirin yang hadir di sini. Di kesempatan kemarin, ketika melakukan riset secara langsung, ada beberapa tim yang diterjunkan di lapangan dan banyak dari mahasiswa yang masih, karena kebetulan saya mendampingi di semester 1, masih belum mempunyai gambaran yang komprehensif bagaimana meneliti di lapangan dengan berbagai kendalanya, dengan batasan waktu, dan sebagainya. Tapi ketika kebetulan kemarin di Lumpang Songo, jadi di Lumpang Songo ini salah satu area yang ada beringin besar dan di bawahnya itu ada seperti alat dapur, kalau di Jawa namanya lumpang, tapi bisa juga sebagai lesung padi. Jadi di situ terdapat sebuah mitos bahwa ada danyang tani yang terdapat di Lumpang Songo. Dari narasumber yang sudah ditemukan kemarin mahasiswa dari folklore, mungkin ada beberapa yang dari sini kemarin juga dari situs lain, dari kelompok lain, yang juga saya melihat ada Mas Agus Rianto ini ya. Di sana teman-teman berjumpa dengan narasumber secara langsung, kemudian mendapatkan arahan dari mentor bagaimana membuat film dengan riset, persiapan riset yang terbaik. Gitu. Sudah ada di tengah-tengah kita? Ada yang mau tanya? Mungkin tadi pemaparan dari Ibu Rosalia dan Pak Hoiru Pradono. Kemudian dilanjut Bu Citra. Silahkan teman-teman. Ada door prize menanti ini.
Tidak ada? Cukup? Berarti bisa dicukupkan sekian sepertinya Bu Farhan.
Oke, sepertinya teman-teman belum ada pertanyaan. Nanti jika ada pertanyaan bisa disampaikan melalui email atau langsung ke jaringan pribadi Bu Citra. Begitu. Ya. Terima kasih Bu Citra untuk pemaparannya.
Ya, terima kasih Bu Hana untuk kesempatannya. Terima kasih teman-teman semuanya. Saya tutup presentasi saya. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Oke, rupanya kita ada di bagian penghujung sesi di International Film Workshop di hari kelima. Saya ucapkan terima kasih kepada ketiga presenter dari Ibu Rosalia Namse Enchuan, BAMA PhD, Max Planck University. Kemudian ada Bapak Hoiru Pradono, SSN MSN dari Institut Seni Indonesia Padang Panjang. Dan yang terakhir ada dari Bu Citra Dewi Utami, SSN MSN dari Institut Seni Indonesia Surakarta. Dan sebelum kita kembalikan ke MC, kita dokumentasi dulu. Bisa teman-teman dari yang hadir untuk on cam dan tim dokumentasi bisa mempersiapkan diri untuk mendokumentasikan pertemuan hari ini.
Baik, teman-teman silahkan on cam untuk diambil gambarnya. Ada 2 slide. Slide pertama silahkan on cam. Saya akan menghitung. Slide pertama silahkan on cam, Mbak Sandi, Mbak Alia. Oke, slide pertama. 1, 2, 3. Kemudian slide kedua silakan on cam. Ada Mas Alvan, Mbak Alias, Nur Isnain, Teguh Akbar Ramadan, Helmi silahkan. Randy silahkan on cam. Untuk slide yang kedua, saya hitung. 1, 2. Sudah cukup, Bu?
Oke, terima kasih. Terima kasih untuk teman-teman yang sudah hadir dan gabung dari awal hingga akhir pertemuan hari ini. Semoga apa yang disampaikan oleh ketiga narasumber, tiga presenter hari ini bermanfaat. Dan saya, Farhana Aulia, saya pamit undur diri. Selamat melanjutkan aktivitas, sehat selalu. Jangan lupa isi presensi ya.